All right. Feedback that fuels. So we will dive into everything that you did and never knew you needed to know about giving feedback. So we're really going to be working on reframing feedback as a tool, not just for performance enhancement and things like that, but also to grow your relationships and build trust and alignment. So who am I? I'm Chelsey Parkinson. I am currently the COO and Director of Coaching and Training at PCADI, which is the Positive Psychology Coaching and Diversity Institute. We are a leadership and diversity firm, and we get out doing that good work to help people be more powerful leaders and to help organizations overhaul their cultures. But some of my background and why I am so suited to be here talking about giving feedback and communicating. I spent the last 10 years of my life as an executive briefer and a supervisor inside the Department of Defense for one of the intelligence agencies. And as such, I've managed many, many people from many different countries in war zones and back at MacDill Air Force Base, where I spent most of my career. And prior to that, I was also a high school teacher, and I have been a chief of staff and head of HR and chief people officer. So all of my adult life, I have spent in a career that has involved communicating and giving some form of feedback to get decisions done, to get products finished, to move the needle on things like ROI. And being able to give powerful feedback is part of why I was entrusted to run as many teams as I was trusted to run at a relatively young age professionally. I've got lots of certifications and lots of other things going on as well. And I am a 3 times business owner. I own my own coaching company, a storage company, and my family runs a construction company. And I joke that I'm a chicken tender because I live on an 11-acre property and we've got about 40 chickens and some ducklings and all kinds of things. So I've got a very busy and full life. So I'd love to, we already talked about your location, but I'd love to know who's joining us. What's your name and your role? I'd love to see that in the comments just to get a sense of where everybody sits in their organizations. So we can be sure that we're chatting about the type of feedback that serves you. So what's your role? What do you do? What do you do? All right, let's see. Talent development. Ooh, chats are coming in faster than I can read them. Human resources, talent development, HR, lots of friends that are HR heads. All right, product safety, consultants, interim executive directors, senior associate attorney. So lots of people working with people and in positions where feedback is a requirement, right? Being able to provide feedback and do it in a way that's going to move the needle is really important. So, okay. So our agenda, just so you know where we're headed, because the human brain loves to know what we're here to do and how we're going to do it. We just did our introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about the power of reframing feedback and taking back control of the way that you think and feel about it so that you can show up to it differently. I'm going to share with you a framework that I have been using for years and years and coach all of my clients on using to ensure that you and the people that you are communicating with are all on the same page, and then walk you through a 4-step feedback flow so that you have a tangible framework and a way to walk away from this webinar to immediately go into your next feedback conversation with a completely different flow and lens. And my dog, of course, is in here making gross noises. Work from home, so fun. All right, so really, what are our goals today? Our goal is to help you build confidence to lead feedback conversations in a new way, to ensure that they are clear and aligned and understood, but to do it with a framework that is built on positive psychology, human behavior, and your own internal landscape so that you can really get the results that you are looking for in your feedback conversations. So to get us kind of in the right frame of reference to talk about feedback, I want you to think of the last time you gave or received feedback. And I know some of you personally, so I know we've had these conversations about the last time that you gave or received feedback. So when you're thinking about this last moment, just kind of, you can close your eyes if it helps you kind of jump back in time, but what assumptions did you bring to that moment? What did you decide in advance about the conversation, about the other person? And what did those things feel like? So, what assumptions did you bring into that moment and what did it feel like? This is just a moment of personal and self reflection. If you're bold and courageous and you want to pop it in the chat, by all means. If you don't, that's okay. A little bit of internal reflection will suffice. So, what assumptions did you bring to that moment and what did it feel like? I remember the first time I gave feedback as a brand new baby supervisor in the DoD, I wanted to throw up because I assumed that feedback had to be negative and it was going to be received so badly. And I was super nervous. And so you can just imagine how that conversation went from that place. I did not have, yeah, the conversation would be open and honest, but it sucked, right? So the assumptions you went in with versus what happened didn't happen, Jen. These things happen to us, right? All right. So let's just start with the idea of feedback. Words have meaning, but the meaning is what you make it, right? And so when we think about a word, what happens to our brain is we hear the word and we have assumptions and thoughts and feelings that all slam together to create our experience with the concept. So for a lot of people, the word feedback automatically reverberates through their entire system. It feels some type of way. Hopefully for some of you, it is neutral, but for a lot of us, if we grew up in professional environments where feedback always meant criticism, or feedback always meant an awkward conversation with your manager or your direct report, the way that you think and feel about the general idea of feedback may sit more on the negative side of the spectrum than on the positive side of the spectrum. But the thing about feedback is that it doesn't necessarily need to be criticism. It can be positive. But a lot of the times when we're giving feedback, again, it's because there's a mistake, there's a growth opportunity. We're trying to dance around what happened instead of specifically addressing it. But that's because a lot of us don't have the tools and skills to set up the conversation in a way that will support us to where we're trying to head. So it's important to remember that when handled in a way that supports who and how you really want to be, feedback is a relationship builder. It's not just a performance correction. And when handled correctly, giving feedback about performance correction, I always used to prefer when somebody could give really good feedback. I want to know what I'm not doing right because I want to be able to do it better. I want to be able to improve. So it turns into a really powerful relationship builder because the people you're giving feedback to genuinely feel like you have their back. And so how do we get there? How do we get from feedback just hurts people's feelings and we end up in these awkward conversations to focusing on connection and clarity and building the type of feedback cycles that build trust and alignment? How do we get there? So before I answer that question for you, what happens for you when somebody says, I have feedback for you? If your manager or even if a direct report, if somebody came to you and said, hey, I have some feedback for you. Do you have 10 minutes? What shows up for you? My mouth gets dry. Immediately in fight mode. Oh, good. We have some curiosity. We have some yikes. We're already in. What do I have to change? Right? A lot of us are going to, there's something wrong with me. Right? A lot of us are going to, oh, great. Now I'm going to get another piece of how I can improve or what I could do better. Yeah, I feel you. Even in all of my coaching glory and all the thousands of hours I've spent talking about this, I have to self-manage around the idea of feedback after 10 years in the government, for sure. So if you haven't read the responses, just give yourself a second and scroll through the answers to this question because you guys are a sample size of the population. This is what people generally think and feel about feedback, right? This is how, when you say to them, hey, I have some feedback for you, this is where their brains go. So that will help us when we're considering how we want to shift the elements of the conversation because you know this is how people are responding if you say that you have feedback for them. Communication in general begins before the conversation. Before words ever exit or an email ever gets typed, the process of feedback and communication starts way before that. And it starts in your internal landscape. So what do I mean about your internal landscape? What happens in here, right? The way that you think and the way that you feel. because that shows up as your behaviors. So when we can get back in touch and more intentionally curate our internal landscape, we are far more likely to get the outcomes that we are looking for in a conversation. So when you think about getting ready to have a feedback conversation, one of the first questions you should be asking yourself is, what do I believe about the other person? What's the story that I have about this person? Everybody has some adjectives, a baseball card, if you will, in their brain about other people. And when we talk about them to ourselves or even to other people, we have a story. Oh, well, this person always takes feedback so badly. They get really loud. They're argumentative, right? Like you have a list of words that you would use to describe that person. And although those things might be valid, they're probably pretty unhelpful to you having the kind of conversation that you want to have. And it's likely a narrow slice of what's totally true about that person. Sometimes when I introduce this to people, automatically they go, no, Chelsey, this person is just argumentative. They're just this, they're just that. Nobody is just anything. Everybody is multifaceted, right? But an animal that feels like they're cornered is going to lash out. Even my ducks, they're very sweet. But if I corner them, they're quacking, they're carrying on. We got feathers flying, right? This is what happens. So I really challenge you to consider what else could be true about these people and really think about what's the helpful thing about them that I know to have the kind of conversation that I want to have. Because there are going to be other things that are true about them. Even if you haven't seen them come out to play with you, you've probably seen them in their discussions and interpersonal dynamics with other people. So the second question that we need to ask ourselves before we go into any type of crucial conversation, conflictual conversation, feedback, anything that you're already assuming has to feel some type of way, is to ask yourself, what am I assuming about myself for the conversation? Am I assuming that I'm going to get frustrated, that I am going to show up some type of way? Am I assuming the conversation has to be difficult? Even if you've had a feedback conversation with this person before and it was some type of way, does not mean it needs to be that type of way again. So being able to break down for yourself what you're coming in with is really helpful because we show up from what we think and feel. Our behaviors are predicated on our thoughts and our feelings. So just asking yourself these two questions. What do you believe about the other person? What story am I bringing in about this person? And what am I assuming about myself in the conversation? Because once you can identify those thoughts, you'll start to notice the feelings that they elicit, right? Some of you gave me words when I asked you what happens when somebody says that they have feedback for you that were very emotionally driven, right? Yikes, with exclamation points. That's got a lot of emotions behind it. And those come from the story that you hold about what feedback means, about how this person is going to give me feedback. The feedback hasn't even happened. We're talking about a hypothetical situation where all I did was ask you, hey, if somebody said I have feedback for you, what would happen? And automatically your brain curates feedback means this, therefore I feel this way. I feel yikes. I feel like I want to roll my eyes, right? So, and it wasn't even a real feedback situation. Let's talk about the 4 parts of communication because a lot of us have been taught, I say words, they hear words. And that is how communication works. And we spend a lot of time, which we should, working on our body language and our tone and the words that we choose. But what comes out of your mouth, again, is a reflection of your internal landscape. So you can be as curated as you want. And if we have red lights blinking in our brain about the other person, it is likely to come out in your communication. So communication actually has 4 parts. And you can imagine a 50% line right down the center that divides you from your conversation partner, right? And your side, there's what you say, what comes out, but what you actually meant. What did you actually mean? And how close together are those two things? Because oftentimes what we say is a curated version. We're trying to polish it and we're trying to do all these things to it, but it's like a bad game of telephone. Where am I actually saying what I mean here? If I'm putting all of these filters and all of these things on top of it? Maybe not. And then we get over to the other side, and now we've delivered a message that is already diluted. They hear it, but all of their filters, their internal biases and their cognitive distortions and their 66,000 thoughts a day and everything they've ever experienced in their life pops up as a filter. through which to receive what you have said. So you can imagine why you walk out of a feedback conversation thinking you're on the same page and you for sure are not. Well, I said this. I thought this was really clear. They heard this. They're vehement that this is what was said. I'm pretty sure that this is what was said because it's not that clean. And when we can understand that there's actually a sublayer underneath all of those, we can double down on shrinking the space between what we say and what we mean, and then what they hear and what they make it mean. Because there's already a space between just the center two, but now we've got these other layers. So it's really important to remember the internal landscape is a lot more important than most of us were taught. I can tell you, I don't think I've ever been to a leadership training, and I've been to every leader. The DoD loves to send us everywhere. I've been everywhere, and I've taken lots of leadership trainings. I didn't encounter this communication breakdown until I became a coach. So this was not something we were being taught in our supervisory trainings or anything like that of how to give really powerful feedback. So my favorite communication tool of all time is my CDB framework. And I love it because it ensures that we walk away from a conversation saying the same thing. So often when we give feedback, so often when we're in conversation, we stop at the concept level. We'll say something like, I need you to be more professional, or I need you to communicate better, or I need more accountability, right? We'll use a concept. And we think that it's universally understood because most concepts, people have a general idea of what they mean. But a concept is just a concept. I use this example often about painting a wall, right? If I said to you, hey, I want to paint this wall green. Can you go and grab some green paint? I'll go and grab some green paint too. If I am thinking of like seafoam green and you are thinking of Kelly green, we are not painting the wall the same color, but green is a concept and green is a universally understood concept, but it is a concept with a spectrum. And every concept has a spectrum of how people understand it for themselves. So if you are the one giving the feedback and you are the one that's expecting an outcome, being able to deliver your expectations with this framework is going to change the game for you because it's going to take you from green to seafoam green that is this product number made by this paint company from this store, so that we end up with the exact same paint to paint the wall versus why is the wall Kelly green? Well, you said you wanted it green, right? So we push from concept, which is the big idea, like green, like professionalism, like accountability. And then our next layer is the definition. And this is where things can start to split. What does it mean to you? When you are saying you want to see this thing, what are you saying this means to you? Because not everything, although it has a generally understood definition, right? Think about it like a bell curve. Although we might be the 80% in the middle, there are still tails on a bell curve that don't fit underneath the average. So being able to explain the definition is going to help you and the other person get closer to congruence on what you're looking for and what you're really expecting. And then the last layer is the most important, and it's the one that people skip all the time: behavior. What does it look like in action? Where people go wrong with the behavior line is they put more concepts in. And they use the concepts. It's kind of like when you're growing up and you're working on your vocabulary in school and they say, well, you can't define a word with the word. When you do the behavior line, you can't define a concept with more concepts. That's not clear. And if you do define a concept with more concepts, you then need to explain them specifically for what they look like, right? So the behaviors need to be very clear of this is what exactly I'm saying this thing looks like, so that there's no confusion from the other party and we don't end up in the, but you said this and I heard this and I thought it meant that, but you were looking for this. We're really trying to make sure that we stay on the same page with this. I use this framework everywhere. I use it with my 5-year-old. I actually learned it very early on in my marriage because my husband and I were having struggles with communicating well and communicating properly. And I realized we were stuck at the conceptual level, and my husband is not American. So we weren't even talking about the same thing. And I learned this framework and started working with this framework at home and realized, wow, this is really changing the way that we talk about things. We're on the same page way more often because we're not using concepts as a proxy for behaviors. All right, so let's take an example of how you might apply this framework. I used kind of a catch-all concept. Professionalism is one I hear all of the time from clients when they're talking about wanting to hire people or wanting to work with employees on their professionalism. And oftentimes, they only get to the definition level if they're, I just want them to be more professional. I really need to, like, we want our culture to be one of professionalism. Great. What do we mean when we say that? What does that look like? What are we talking about? And so let's walk through an example. This is one of my examples, how I might think about this, of what professionalism can look like, right? So our concept line or C line is professionalism. Then we get into, well, what do I mean? Like, what does professionalism mean to me? How am I defining this? So some things, again, these are a little bit conceptual because we're still on the definition line, are showing reliability, respect, and preparation in the workplace. And then I need to push that because reliability is a concept, respect is a concept, and preparation in the workplace is a concept, into some behaviors that would show to me these things are happening, right? So joining meetings early with camera on and materials ready. That's very clear. It's not conceptual, right? Early, you could argue, you could get really granular with that and put 5 minutes if you really wanted to, but it's understood that the expectation is you'll be at your meetings when you need to be there, and you'll have what you need to have prepared, right? Something that's important to us at PCADI is using correct names and pronouns. So if that's an expectation of mine for professionalism of how we show respect to other people that we work with, that would be something that I would want to put in my expectations of behaviors. And sends timely follow-ups. I'd probably push that one a little bit further, where it would be specifically about, we follow up with clients within 48 hours. That's one of our rules at PCADI. You follow up with a client after you get assigned a client, you follow up with them within 48 hours. It's an expectation. That's part of our, professional conduct. So you can see how we move from concepts, really high level, professionalism. Roughly, we all know what that means, all the way down to, if you are demonstrating professionalism, this is what I will see. Makes it really easy then when you go back to give feedback to say, hey, you've been joining meetings early or you haven't. You've been using correct names or pronouns or you haven't. And you've been sending, clients follow-ups within 48 hours, or you haven't been sending them follow-ups within 48 hours. So it ensures that we are on the same page and talking about the same things, which makes life much easier. And I will sneak in that as a parent, this is, even with a 5-year-old, this is making my life way easier. All right. So let's work through one as a group, because it'll be interesting to see just the variations in different ideas and thoughts on concepts all the way down to behaviors. So our scenario is you have a team member who is consistently missing deadlines. Time is one of my highest values, so can share this one, makes me nuts. And so we're going to apply the framework to the concept of accountability. We're going to walk through the 4 parts of communication, and we're really going to consider your own mindset before and after using the model. So I'm going to pop this down in a second so we can see each other, which might make some of you itch that we're going to do some group work here. But before I pull this down, I want you to just jot down really quickly immediately what's in your brain. A team member consistently misses deadlines. Immediately, where does your mindset go? What are you thinking about? Where do you notice it in your body? Do you have a specific emotion that's flaring? I know I can already feel like I want to clench my fists, and I'm getting like, a little verklempt over here. So a team member consistently misses deadlines. Yikes. Yikes, yikes, yikes. All right, let's pull this down and let's work through what this can look like. I need to stop my share. Yes, seamlessly. I can technology. We can do hard things, y'all. We can do hard things. Jen, you're laughing at me, but you know that me and the sharing of the screens, it's not always great. All right, let's see what we've got in the chats. Okay. So who would be brave and pop off mute and chat with me about what's in your brain before we even get into breaking down our concept, definition, behavior, or using our 4 parts of communication? What's in our brain? We've got some in the chat. Let's see. We've got, how can I help them? Nice. We've got irresponsible. And do they care, feeling indignant, and they're doing it on purpose, right? We start storytelling. Christina, I'm so glad that you added an element there of storytelling. We start to decide in advance for this person, oh, this is why they're doing this. I know exactly what they're doing. We've got maybe some curiosity about if the request was clear. Well, if we didn't use our CDB framework, maybe it wasn't clear. Maybe we didn't really break down what we meant. Maybe we said punctuality, and although we'd love to think that everybody thinks the same thing about it, they do not. This again, right? If we've said it a bunch of times and we're still here, could be super frustrating. And Lindsay added in, I should have checked in more. Maybe this could have been avoided, right? So a little bit of self-reflection, which can border on martyrdom if we're not careful, where we're taking all the accountability and not holding the other person accountable to their behaviors as well. So what is the underlying problem? Yeah. And this could be a symptom of something bigger, right? Is this indicative of maybe we're misaligned with company values, or, just don't understand generally the layers to our team and our expectations? So lots of pieces here. Who can throw out a concept that they might use to combat this? Like, what's a word that you would start our concept definition behavior framework with? They're showing up late, they're missing deadlines, they're doing all of these things. What's the antithesis to this? Organization. Okay. Timely. What else? Focus. Responsibility. So even notice that you're all giving me different answers, right? So even the idea that not missing deadlines has a common thread to it, or has a common concept, is a misnomer. So you'll notice how your assumptions and your own brain of like, well, this is how it was explained to me, or this is what it was to me, that's what's giving the answer to me, right? Your answer is informed by what it looks like to you, but you're all giving different answers. So there is no, common idea of what this can look like and what this can cause. All right, so we have time management from 2. So I'm gonna pick on time management. So our concept is time management. What is time management? Who's got a definition? You can pop it in the chat. I just want you to notice how many layers to this. None of you are going to give me the exact same answer, and that's kind of the point, right? But we go into our conversations thinking everybody has the same idea. So what is time management? Because for me, the first word that pops up for time management is prioritization. But that's something that I really value, is prioritization. So time management to me stems from prioritization. Meeting deadlines, right? So Allison went a little bit more granular. I went to a concept of prioritization. She went to meeting deadlines. Pacing yourself and knowing how long it takes you to work on something, which is similar, right, to what Quint said, which is using time effectively, not wasting it, which you have to be aware of how to use your time. Identifying tasks, organization, yep, looking at the scope of your work. So lots of this is about the person's awareness, right? A lot of this is about being aware of how to use your time, of understanding priorities and deadlines. It's not just as simple as time management. But people throw time management around like it's this very easy, well, you just need to manage your time better. What does that mean? What does that mean, right? So now we're getting into, some of these have behavioral elements in them too, right? So if we were to be working with this employee and we were to say the dreaded, I have some feedback for you, with which a hot tip is, don't ambush people with that. They do not like it. Don't send calendar invites that don't have some kind of, this is what we will be talking about. You will cause your employees so much strife and angst and make them sick, and they probably won't sleep. So then they'll show up to your feedback meeting frazzled and over caffeinated and underhydrated. And then none of these frameworks are going to be helpful, because you're going to have a completely unregulated employee, right? So our concept here was time management. Some of these definitions, you can see, you guys aren't even all on the same page with definitions, which is fine. But if in the room of leaders we're thinking about time management differently, now add in the layer of your teams and how they might be thinking about time management. So some of you mentioned, oh, I can't believe we're having this conversation again. Well, if the last time you had this conversation with them, you said to them, I need you to manage your time better, and that was it, perhaps you can see how we ended up here, right? And I'm poking fun at you all, but nobody taught you this before. Nobody really taught you to get super, super granular from a, this is how I see it and what I mean. we've got performance appraisals and we've got behavioral elements to PIPs and things like that. But this is different because this is having that face-to-face conversation and saying, what are you taking away from this? Are you hearing what I'm saying? Are we on the same page? Do you have any questions about, for example, looking at the scope of your work? And making sure that they are understanding what you're putting down, right? So we've got, some of you gave me some really good behaviors in here too. Let's see, calculating time required, right? Like, do they even know how long some of these things take? And the behavior line is where you come in as a leader and you help them. Instead of just dumping it at them, right? A lot of you put curiosity-based things in the chat about, well, what could be happening here for them? The behavior line is where you ask. Maybe they don't know how to calculate the time required. Maybe that's not something that they're doing a great job with, or they just go task by task by task and try to get it all done. So they have no frame of reference. They can't say, oh, it'll probably take me 45 minutes. Maybe they don't know how to do that. So the behavior line is your opportunity to ask questions about their capacity. I don't want to say capacity, their understanding and their ability to execute that behavioral element. That's really helpful for there. So we want to be sure that, oh, we got some folks sitting in the waiting room. Let me let them in really quickly. That we're using the behavioral line not just to spit tasks at people, but to make sure that they can actually execute it. Do they have enough information and enough knowledge to actually execute at the behavioral line that you're asking them to do? So that's really the leadership line. The behavioral line is the leadership line of, I'm telling you, this is what I expect to see. It's also my job to make sure you are equipped to do that. Because otherwise I can ask you to do it all day long. But if you don't know how to calculate the scope or time of a project, then we've got issues, right? It also gives you a very clear line to measure progress against, where there is no question. If you've set a 90-day window, for example, that this person needs to learn these things in your behavioral line, it makes it very clear. As a former head of HR and supervisor, the more clarity you can have with the specific behaviors you are looking for, the less angst and nonsense you are going to have if you end up in the unfortunate situation of a PIP or any type of performative action, right? The more specific that you can get, the easier it is to say, hey, this was the behavior, this was the expectation, this was the time frame, we did or didn't see it. So the behavioral line also is a little bit CYA, because it makes it very granular and easy to hold people accountable to what you're saying. It's not as easy to hold somebody accountable to kind of an ethereal time management. That's hard. So the behavioral line saves you from that. Before we move on to how we use the 4 parts of communication, does anybody have any questions or comments or concerns about the modeling so far? I can answer. Otherwise, I shall plow along. You can also wait until the end and ask me any questions that come up then. All right. So when we think about how the CDB framework supports what you say and what you mean, that's what shrinks it. That's what turns what you say and what you mean into the same thing. Because what I'm saying is time management, and I'm telling you what I mean by saying time management. So it doesn't turn into, well, I don't want to micromanage and I don't want to, give them too much information. Nope, I'm going to tell them exactly what I expect to see so that we walk away from our conversation exactly on the same page, all the way down to the behavioral line. Behaviors are not implied. As somebody who really loves very explicit and direct communication, and it drives my poor partner nuts sometimes, I really want the step-by-step and the exactly what you mean. Don't open the fridge and say, oh, we're out of milk. No, Chelsey, we need more milk, right? It's a distinction, but it's a powerful one because it doesn't, then it's just not an observation. It's very specific. So we want to be sure that we're shrinking the what we say and what we mean so that they're as close as possible, because on the recipient side, the what they hear and what they make it mean is harder to control, because your brain has filters and cognitive distortions and unconscious biases that live in it, that in the moment, lots of self-awareness can help with this, but your brain is still going to filter information through and rifle around in the internal filing cabinet to make it make sense. So as the deliverer of information, the clearer that you can be on your side helps with their own filters and biases that are harder to control because they're just part of the human brain. They're just part of neuroscience. So the clearer you are on this side, the easier it is for them to really understand where you're coming from. Jen, you have a question?
Yeah, just to follow up on what you're saying there, is it helpful or obnoxious or intrusive if you give feedback and in this framework that we're talking about, and you ask the person, is this clear? Do you understand? Do you need any more information? And they say yes, so you're taking them on their word. Is it helpful at all to ask them sort of to not repeat it back, but sort of share their interpretation of what they've just heard?
Yep. I always think it's really helpful at the end of a conversation to ask how they're receiving the information or what they took away from it. There's lots of different variations. You'll find a way for you that doesn't land as patronizing. I like what did you hear me say? What did you hear me say? What does this mean to you? Ask for paraphrasing just to be, and packaging it as, not that I need you to tell me what you heard me say. I just want to be sure that when we walk away from this meeting, we're on the same page. I mentioned that, a value of mine is time. So I always tell anybody who works for me or works with me, time is a really big value of mine. So if I'm asking for clarity or paraphrasing, it's because I don't want us to end up back here again, in a week, because there were questions or there was incongruence and we didn't hash it out when we had the opportunity. So I think asking, to hear somebody, especially when we're doing conversations on Slack or even on Zoom, it's not as connective as when we used to be face to face in the office. And we can work on that, but we have to add in some of these extra elements to make sure we're on the same page. All right, Christina has one in the chat too. I understand not wanting to ambush someone with feedback. Yep, but yes, it can create anxiety. Well, if you send an email that says let's have a meeting, I have some feedback for you. Yeah, wording matters. I would put the context of the conversation about, if it's this depends on your relationship with the person. Let me caveat by saying relationships trump everything. So everything that I'm talking about, somebody put it in the chat before, the relationship that you have with the person is the majority of your information for how you carry forward with them, right? These are frameworks that work with basic human psychology and human behavior, and you have relationships with people, right? So depending on the person, I might just say, the topical area versus feedback. Like maybe you want to post-mortem a project. You could say that. I want to post-mortem a project, or I'd love to learn more about the meeting you had with so-and-so. I think it's all about the way that you package and deliver it. So we have to find that balance between, I want you to know what we need to talk about, and also I'm not trying to terrify you um, with dangling, hey, I have some feedback for you. You got 10 minutes? Sometimes that is how it has to be. Everything has a caveat of as most as possible, as best as possible, if you can give somebody some space to think about it so that they have the opportunity to show up how they want to show up too. And sometimes as a manager, you're between meetings, somebody just did some stuff in a meeting that we need to talk about right then. You don't really have a choice, right? We need to give that immediate feedback because maybe you're getting ready to go into another meeting and it's something that needs to be course corrected. I can think of a couple of employees I had who we'd be in a briefing with a congressman or a general or something, and the way that they briefed that thing or something that came out of their mouth, I was like, no, okay, we got to correct this before we rock into our next, senior leader. So those would be caveats too. Don't ambush people. Sometimes you have to. All right, let's see. Quint. Trying to help a supervisor who bristles a bit against giving explicit expectations because they feel the person should understand expectations. Expectations is a dirty word. I hate that word. I think of expectations are like clouds. You can see them and they have a shape, but if you went to grab them, there would be nothing there, right? Like it's not actually made of any substance. So anything I can share with the manager to help them understand the importance of their role in clear communication, and that it's not unreasonable or that the person is being lazy to expect more details to be shared. So high level, my brain goes to results, and ROI and output is always more important than how we think somebody should or shouldn't be behaving. Not from we don't work on behavior and we don't, but this is the manager's expectations of the employee versus the manager wanting to change the way they're delivering feedback. So being able to link it back to something that's important to the manager, and this would mean that you have to know that, like maybe they really value output. Maybe they really value excellence, right? Like, what do they value as a manager, and how can we roll the behavior change for the manager into what they're really looking for? For me, if you can convince me that's going to save me time, or we're going to get there more efficiently or effectively, I will give feedback 6 different ways from Sunday if it means that the output is going to be my employee gets what they need from me. Oh, and we're not going to have this conversation again because we're going to be done. So if you knew the values of the person and what really makes them tick, I'm going to use the word manipulate. I mean it in a neutral sense. We can manipulate what we're asking them to do in service of where we're going, instead of in service of their instant gratification response to, I don't want to change the way I'm doing this because they should know better. It's kind of irrelevant if you think they should know better because it's not working. So the validity versus relevance argument, this is one of my favorite frameworks. It's valid that you think they should know. It's valid that you want them to know, and it's valid that you're frustrated that they don't. And it is also irrelevant because what we're doing isn't getting us where we want to be. So I use validity and relevance. I have a couple of clients in here. I can see you shaking your heads because you know that I love to sprinkle the validity and relevance conversation at you, right? Okay. And if we get into, kind of our what they hear, what they make it mean, that's human cognition. Like, I didn't make that up. That is a truth about psychology of what people hear and what they make it mean is not always congruent. And if you want it to be, you have to learn on your side how to help make it as clear as possible so that their filters can't distort it any more than their filters are going to want to distort it. Because there's all kinds of filters that people are receiving things through, like their parents' voices or a past manager's voice or things that have happened to them. So I think rooting back down into, well, what's really my job as a manager? To help my employees get the results that we're responsible for. Okay, well, what are the different behavioral elements that I could be applying here that are going to help me get us where we need to be? It moves people more into a creative headspace too. So any other questions, anything else that I can high level work through for y'all before I take us through the end of our slide deck? All right, let me get us back. Share my screen, make sure that I'm opening the right window and not showing you my erratic desktop. Okay. So just to kind of double down here, just remember how many different answers we got for each level of this. Nobody's brain is thinking exactly the same way. Concepts are general. They are a general idea that gets you into the football field or the ballpark or whatever metaphor you want to use, right? But that doesn't mean you're sitting in the same section. In order for us to sit in the same section, to be watching the game from exactly the same vantage point, we have to walk through the rest of this framework, right? It's not enough to be in the same ballpark. We want to be sure that we are sitting, side by side so that we're watching the play-by-play together and receiving the information in the same way. All right, some key takeaways about feedback. Feedback is about getting to alignment, not just performative action, not just reminding people of their shortfalls, which, leadership, a lot of leadership training and how we've been taught to manage people comes from a deficit model, because a lot of psychology comes from a deficit model. We are a positive psychology company, so we like to also incorporate what's right with people and what they're already doing right as a way to help them boost some of the things that they're working on. Learning how to give feedback from a multifaceted perspective allows you to plant seeds in fertile soil. Seeds don't grow in scorched earth. So why we think the old models of feedback are helpful, I don't know. People have a really hard time changing from endless deficit modeling, right? And one of the most important pieces of information, if you take nothing else away from this today, please remember that communication starts before words ever come out of your mouth. It starts with your internal landscape. It starts with how you think and feel, how your employee thinks and feels. It starts with the inside, because thoughts and feelings equal our behaviors, and our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors show up as our results. So if we don't like our results, we got to go jump over to our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and figure out what's misaligned in there, what's wonky, what do I need to adjust so that I can get the result that I'm really seeking. And using tools like the frameworks I've given you today, I can promise you they work. I've used them with thousands of clients at this point in time, from corporate to one-on-one clients. I use it in my own life with my partner and my 5-year-old, and in all of the places and spaces that I have worked. So it ensures clarity and connection, and people feel better. Even if you're giving them feedback over something that's hard to hear, they're going to feel better when they get it. There's nothing worse than getting murky feedback about something you've done wrong. Oh, good. You're telling me I didn't do a good job here. And also, I have no idea what you're telling me. Fantastic. That doesn't give somebody an opportunity to grow. It gives them an opportunity to be frustrated and to never want to get feedback from you again. We've all had those managers. We might even be those managers a little bit. So let's not. Let's commit today that we're going to stop being the managers who give feedback that doesn't align true expectations, which is the behavioral, right? The behavioral line with the way that you're delivering the information. All right, we're gonna open up the floor for some questions if we've got them. I'm trying to get into the chat. Sandwich approach can be very confusing when it's done badly. As a strengths-based company, we like to use strengths as a way to introduce a lens through which to hear the feedback, not to placate and not to try to make them feel better about themselves, but to say, yeah, you've got a mountain to climb, but you've already got some tools in your toolkit. So let's figure out how we marry what you're already really good at with this mountain that you have to climb. It's where elements like honesty and not mincing words come out to play, because sometimes we have hard feedback to give. You are not doing or performing the way that you need to, and there are going to be elements of work that they have done that showcases that they have the capacity. So being able to layer in the strengths and the things that they do right into what they need to grow from also allows their amygdala to be released, like their creative thinking and their curiosity and problem solving. It's going to allow them to be able to hold the problem in a different mindset so that they can actually tackle it. It's hard when you hear endlessly that you're not doing the right things, right? Then how do you believe that you can do the right thing? So we like to use strengths as a way to remind people you have these tools in your toolkit always. Your strengths are always with you. So how are you going to use that to solve the problem here? It gives people a way to look at it slightly differently. Any other questions? Oh, question submission. What do you recommend for leaders who are naturally conflict avoidant but know they need to give feedback? So I would poke at the fact that we've even got conflict avoidant in our bio. Like if we're talking about ourselves as conflict avoidant, then one, you believe things have to be conflictual, which is problematic because that's what you're putting in your GPS, right? I want you to think about mindset as like an address in the GPS. If you expect the conversation is going to be conflictual, you will have a really hard time stopping yourself from driving to conflict. So that is my first thought on that. And then my second thought on that is to consider how you want feedback to be. We have so much more power and so much more ownership of our human experience than we give ourselves credit for. And so being able to decide in advance how you want to have a conversation, and even being honest with your employee, like, hey, feedback is part of the deal. It's not, I don't love it, you don't love it, and we can decide how we're going to have a feedback relationship. How's this going to look? How are we going to have these conversations? I always really like to set norms and agreements, psychological safety, with my employees and with my teams to say, this is what we're agreeing to. It's not always going to be rainbows and unicorns, and that's okay. But how are we going to have feedback? How are you agreeing to receiving it? How am I agreeing to giving it? What are our feedback loops for feedback? What are those norms? Do you have those norms built into your team? Because if we don't have a set of values and norms, it's really hard to do these things in a way that serves who we said we were going to be. So it's a really good exercise to do with teams because it engenders buy-in and people feel like they belong. Like, I care about the way you want to receive feedback. I care about the way that we're going to operate. I care about the way we say we're going to operate. And here's what this can look like. And we get buy-in from everybody. When we do psychological safety in organizations, as an example, the list isn't done until everybody is bought in, because everybody on the team has to agree this is how we're going to be in relationship. Because if we have people who aren't agreeing to that, then they maybe don't make sense for the culture and the fabric of that particular team. All right, so let's see what else we got. Yep, asking folks to repeat back. It's one of my favorites. And at first, some people bristle against it because it can harken back to certain childhood memories and things like that. But again, if you explain the purpose of it, of like, I really want to be sure that you can be successful, and that means that I also need to know if I'm communicating what I mean clearly. Like none of us are infallible, so it gives you a moment to be slightly vulnerable in service of, I want you to feel good about what I'm asking you to do and knowing that you know what to do, and I want to know that we walked out if you're going Kelly Green, not Seafoam Green, right? All right. Sorry, y'all, my camera is right in the middle of my screen, and that's right where the chat is too. All right, how can we make direct feedback with specific behaviors not come across as demanding? Okay, and lead to a balk from the employee. So my first thought is for you to consider how you want it to land. With full understanding, we don't control how other people take us, and we can still change the way we show up in service of how we would like them to take us, right? So if you don't want to come across as demanding, how do you want to come across, right? Like what in your perfect world, if you were to ask your employee, hey, how did this come across to you? What word or experience would you want them to come up with? We can't control other people, right? Some people are just going to feel like you asking something from them is demanding, and we need to understand that to a degree. But at some point in time, right, relationships are patterned. We have, because of our stories, relationships become patterned. And so if you've got two people who are constantly like this, but you start to change yours, even if they're, I don't know that I can do those differently at the same time. If you start to change yours, over time, it will permeate the other side. It might just take a little bit longer, right? So we want to plant the seeds, but you want to be intentional about the seeds that you're planting. So direct feedback with specific behaviors. Also make it collaborative and co-created. You know, asking the employee, what do you think would change this or make this better, right? And sometimes we're going to get with an employee who just always feels like what they're being asked to do is demanding. Why are you in corporate America? Why are you working for other people if you don't want to have a list of things you have to execute, right? That's the cost of working underneath somebody else's framework. That's why I don't work underneath somebody else's framework anymore. I don't like being told what to do, right? And that was a self-awareness part for me. It's just not a great place for me. I feel like I don't like being micromanaged. I think everything is micromanagement, right? Not everybody has that self-awareness or self-trust to go and to manage it. So step one is your internal landscape, right? That's the first part of all of our frameworks. Who and how do I want to be? How do I want to show up? What does that require from me? And then you start changing your side of the equation, and one of two things will happen. It will either start to change the other side of the equation, or it won't, which allows you to then step into acceptance or other performative actions and things like that. So, all right. Yes, creating a culture where if we make feedback a norm and you're asking for it as well as a manager, and you are holding yourself to the same agreements of, you know, I'm going to take this feedback and I'm going to receive it and I'm going to let people practice giving feedback, treating it as a practice zone, it's not going to be perfect every time. So the intention and the way that we hold other people in our mind matters. Feedback isn't going to be perfect every time, right? But that's okay. All right. A 360 can be very helpful. Teach my managers how to manage me. It's one of my favorite things to do is to do exercises with your employees where you understand, like, I used to work on multi-generational teams in the DoD. Some of my employees were 30 years older than I was. They did not like email communication when we sat 3 feet from each other. And that was a norm that I was willing to adjust to walk over to their desk, to have a conversation face to face, because I need the result, not how I want to feel in that moment. How I want to feel is we are working as a team to get our briefings done, to get our products done, to do what we need to do. And what you're asking me for is not unreasonable. I can get up and I can come over here and I can explain the paper that I need you to write, or, you know, the briefing that I need you to deliver. So allowing yourself to be flexible in service of the result too, and teaching people how to be in relationship with each other. It's ridiculous to assume that just because we're in a professional environment, all of a sudden everybody's needs are homogenous. We don't expect that out in the world. We certainly don't expect it when we're seeking friends and romantic partners. But all of a sudden in the workplace, we're like, nope, everybody has to subscribe to the same way of being. What? No, that's not how we operate as a company at all, right? It's not particularly inclusive, and it doesn't create belonging if we don't make just a micro smidgen more effort of, hey, let me understand how you best operate so that we can do our jobs as best as possible, right? All right, y'all, I'm gonna really quick pull up my slides one more time because I have a beautiful offer for you to come and hang out with me some more. Except I've lost the share screen button. How many times in one session can I lose this? It's like a game. Here it is. And it's green. It's not like you can lose it. It's green. All right. So some ways that we can stay connected. You can find us on the interwebs. We're on LinkedIn. We are on Instagram. We are all the places. So you can come and follow along on LinkedIn. We post all kinds of stuff, blogs and really helpful tips. And we talk about the work that we're doing. You can also connect with me. That's my direct email address right there. It won't land in some empty inbox. You will get a hold directly of me where we can talk about customized training, workshops, one-on-one coaching, team coaching, how to build out feedback in your own life with your teams. So please feel free to email me. And we'd love to offer everybody on the webinar a free 30-minute coaching session with myself and our CEO, Kiki Ramsey. We'd love to chat with you, give you an opportunity to get to know us a little bit more, and to assist you with anything that you might need. We do these every month, so hopefully we will see you here again next time. And there is the link in the chat if you would like to hop on my calendar and come dive in more deeply into something that you're working on. Bye, y'all. Happy Wednesday. I will see some of you soon.